they, them pronouns, and I'm one of the events hosts here at the Booksmith. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Tucker Shaw and F.T. Lukens as we celebrate the release of their two books, Right Beside You and Love at Second Sight. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that if you haven't picked up a pre-ordered book, or if you'd like to buy copies of Right Beside You or Love at Second Sight, you can do so at the register behind our event space at the end of the event. Thank you so much for supporting our store and these lovely authors by buying books with us. Just going to give you a little bit of an introduction about our authors and the books that they are debuting tonight. So Tucker Shaw has been a writer and editor for the past 3 decades. He has worked with many publications, including Out Magazine, Kirkus Reviews, The Wall Street Journal, The Denver Post, Time Warner, and many others. He's the author of the 2022 novel, When You Call My Name, which earned many starred reviews and has appeared in several best of year roundups. His newest book, Right Beside You, has earned starred reviews from Kirkus, Booklist, Library Journal, and more. In Right Beside You, high school has just ended and Eddie is at a loss for what's next. He had a falling out with his best friend and has never related to the rest of his peers in his sleepy Colorado town he calls home. The future is bleak until his eccentric great aunt Cookie asks him to care for her in New York City as she recuperates from an illness. Eddie leaps at the opportunity. Soon he arrives in her tiny Greenwich Village apartment, homebound. Cookie asked Eddie to use her vintage Polaroid camera to snap pictures of her favorite places she can no longer visit. But something's unusual about this camera. When he takes a photo, he's launched back in time into an entirely different New York of the early 20th century. As Eddie explores the underground queer life of the 1930s, he discovers new undercurrents of his own identity. Not to mention a dangerously handsome boy in scuffed boots and tapered stovepipe trousers who keeps popping up in his visions of the past. When Eddie begins to develop a crush on Francis, a cute baker named Theo enters the picture and he's in the present. Caught between timelines and feelings, Eddie must make a decision about what he's willing to chase. His romantic fantasies of the past or a reality that might just be what he's been wanting all along. F.T. Lukens is a New York Times bestselling author of young adult speculative fiction, including the novels Otherworldly, Spellbound, So This Is Ever After, and In Deeper Waters, as well as other sci-fi and fantasy works. Their contemporary fantasy novel, The Rules and Regulations for Meditating Myths and Magic, was a 2017 Silvis Award finalist in Young Adult Speculative Fiction and won the Best Bisexual Book Award for Speculative Fiction. F.T. resides in North Carolina with their spouse, 3 kids, 3 dogs, and 3 cats. In their newest release, Love at Second Sight, 15-year-old Cam Reynolds wants to spend his sophomore year flying under the radar. That shouldn't be too hard considering he's human going to school with kids who have paranormal powers, like his best friend and witch, Al, and his longtime werewolf crush, Mateo. Then Cam has a psychic glimpse of the future in front of most of the student body, seeing a gruesomely murdered teen girl from the point of view of the killer. When Cam comes to, he knows 2 things. Someone he goes to school with is a future murderer, and his life is about to change. No longer a mere human, but a clairvoyant, one of the rarest supernatural beings. Cam finds himself at the center of attention for the first time. As the most powerful supernatural factions in the city court, Cam and his gift, he'll have to work with his friends, both old and new, to figure out who he can trust and who might be a werewolf in sheep's clothing. But the clock is ticking, and Cam and his friends must identify the girl in the vision, find her potential killer, and prevent the murder from happening, or the next murder Cam sees might be his own. Please help me in welcoming Tucker Shaw and F.T. Lukens.
Thank you. Hi. Can you hear me okay? Should I do this? Do this? Okay, cool. Sorry. This is my first time meeting FT, and I have to say I'm really honored to be here with you tonight because you are an extraordinary writer, and the imagination that you put into your work, it just amazes me. So thank you for sharing this moment with me.
Thank you for the ego boost. And I thought it was really cool when I found out that I was hanging out with Tucker because I read Right Beside You, and it's amazing. Our books could not be more different.
This is true.
Yes. So this will be a fun conversation.
So if I can ask you, from that description, many of you may have picked up that your book is, it's set in a town, which I found remarkable, because it's a town that's populated by people, but also werewolves and sprites and clairvoyants and witches and all sorts of people or beings with supernatural capabilities and souls. And one thing I've always wondered about when you're writing about something like werewolves, how do you set the rules for what a werewolf can be, cannot be, can do, and how do you make those rules kind of coalesce with what we would sort of see as human life?
So for this specific book, what I did is the characters came first. And so I was brainstorming this with a friend, and I brainstormed this and started writing this before Wednesday aired. So I just want to put that out there. And then as I was watching Wednesday, I was like, oh no. But my werewolves are a little different. But as I was developing the characters and developing the town, the setting was really important to me, and making sure that the town kind of gave off like, it's called Shady Hollow. So like Sleepy Hollow or Erie, Indiana, or those kind of creepy paranormal towns. So I was developing the town and developing the characters, and as I was doing that and how the characters were going to interact with each other is when I started building the rules of how each different paranormal entity or being would be in the town. And then went back through and added the little things. So like there's witches. So the interstates have witch lanes instead of bike lanes. So broom lanes. And then there's bike racks and broom racks. The high school has reinforced glass because werewolves have enhanced strength. So there has to be some precautions there for the high school. So yeah, as I was building the characters themselves and the town around them is when I started to like put in those little things about, well, witches can do this and werewolves can do that and sprites do this, and the rules around them to serve the story and the character arc and the plot.
And it's fascinating to me because I think when you are creating these communities within a larger community, it reads a lot like life, the life that we experience, which is there are groups of people who believe this or live this way. There are other groups of people who believe that and live that way. And yet we all sort of have to figure out how to, live together and solve mysteries and deal with like premonitions of murder and so forth as we do in real life. And it's complicated and surprisingly relatable to me to be relating to werewolves, right? Not the enhanced strength part, but the maybe hairs growing in weird places part.
Well, one of the things I'm going to talk to you about in Right Beside You that you brought up in my book is the setting, because this takes place in New York, but it takes place in New York in different time periods. And when I was reading it, I was like, these descriptions are amazing. So tell me about New York, and tell me about how you did the research for the locations you used and where they were in time.
Yeah, so New York is really kind of the main character in this book in many ways. And some of you who may have read an earlier book of mine called When You Call My Name, same deal. New York is sort of the main character in that book in many ways. This book takes place primarily sort of contemporary and also in 1930 in New York. And I became really, really obsessed with this period in New York City, kind of at the tail end of the Roaring 20s, rolling into the Depression before World War II, in conversation with Weimar Germany and other places in the world, where there were really elaborate and sophisticated and colorful and energetic queer communities. And the words they used were very different. They were called fairies or pansies or the kinds of words that we don't necessarily use today, but were very common during that time. But there were drag balls that, when I was reading about them in many sources, and this was my favorite part of this book, was really doing the research about this period in New York. But they felt like Drag Race in a way. Like these were queens in like gorgeous costumes and coal-lined eyes and like lip stains and you know, feathers and all the things you want in a great drag queen, being sort of on parade, you know, and a little bit, there wasn't a lot of lip syncing, or maybe there was, I don't know, but it wouldn't have been the same. And so we often, I think, grow up as gay people, or at least in my generation, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, so now, still growing up, you sort of have this weird notion that gay rights, queer rights are sort of up and to the right all the time. It's like the idea is that we progress and we just get continually better and things continue to get better. But that's not true. It goes up, it comes down, it goes around. It's like, it's always a little bit different. But the idea that this didn't exist in the past is not true. And not only did it just exist in the past, it existed in a way that was exciting, and it was magnetic, and it was, there was a vogue for it in a certain way. A lot of the nightclubs that were catering to mostly straight people at the time would have elements of queer culture in them. And I was fascinated by this. So my character kind of time travels, I guess, a little bit between contemporary New York and that period of time. And I don't know, doing the research for that just opened up a whole new world for me and how I think about what queer culture sort of means.
Well, reading it, and it made me really, well, first off, your descriptions are amazing. So it felt like I was there when I was reading the descriptions of the drag balls and then the day at the beach and those things. It felt like I was there and witnessing that. So that was really awesome. But also, I felt uneducated when I was reading that. I was like, really? So it was really cool to experience that too. And one thing that our books have in common that I noticed was that both of our main characters are searching for belonging. And yours finds his in the past and in the future, and mine finds his with werewolves. But when you were developing Eddie, your main character, what were you thinking about his journey, his character arc, and what were you trying to achieve with him and from his start to his finish?
Somebody said something to him at the very beginning of the book, and this would have taken place kind of contemporary to now, the 2020s. And his friend says, so what if you're gay? Nobody cares. We don't care about that anymore. And I hate that when I hear that because it's so important. And so I wanted Eddie to have the reaction to that of like, oh no, actually it does matter. And he doesn't know it yet, but I wanted his journey to be that, to recognize that it does matter, that pride actually has a meaning more than a day, and that that it's also not necessarily something that segments you off from the rest of the world. It is part of the world. So through his, travels back in time, part of this, I was telling you this in the back, all of this kind of sprang from my obsession with Mae West, because I've always been obsessed with Mae West, and I was just really trying to figure out what is the context in which Mae West kind of takes over Broadway and does shows with like drag queens and like becomes basically a drag queen herself and an inspiration for drag queens.
And then your main character, when the older character was like, well, don't you know Mae West? And your main character was like, no, who's that? And I was like, oh.
It's so true.
So relatable.
Yeah. But what do you say about the search for belonging? I mean, in your book, your character, Cam, is searching for a place, I don't know, kind of like understanding where he lives in this town, understanding his own powers, figuring out how to harness this. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he learns early on that he has some special characteristics and some special powers, and he's not quite sure how to use them. And I think that's a very relatable thing for growing up. Like, what do I do with this body and this mind that I have?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the book, Cam is, the main character Cam, is doing these small acts of rebellion. Small things that teenagers do that I did, like dyeing his hair and wearing a t-shirt for his favorite band that his parents hate, and those kinds of things. So he's kind of pushing the envelope, but not much, not anything that's going to jeopardize, schooling or where he is with his family, those kinds of things, but just little small things. But then he goes to the first day of school. He happens to get into a fight as collateral damage and has a psychic vision. And so from that point forward, he has to deal with the fact that he is different, and he's different than what his parents want him to be. And he's got to figure out a way to step into this new world. Now, he's always known that there were paranormal beings around him. His best friend's a witch. His crush is a werewolf, and he knows that there's vampires and cryptids and all that kind of stuff out there. But now he is one, and he has to figure out what that means for him, what that means in his family, what that means in his school, with his friends, and that's his character arc in the book, is figuring out where he truly belongs and what who's his found family.
I'm always fascinated by this idea of a child being different to their parents, because I think that's a very endemic thing for a lot of gay people, queer people, is that your family can love you, they can be very supportive of you, but they really don't get it. They will try, maybe, if they're great, and they will also recognize that they don't get it if they're extra great, but you do have to find a family. I think of it sometimes as more like building a family, because it takes work. But to sort of define yourself in opposition to your family, which is something that teenagers of all stripes want to do, and actually grown-ups want to do. But especially just creating a world for himself where he grasps confidence to understand who he is, to understand the limitations and the opportunities, and also kind of be willing to fall in love and get your heart broken, which you have to have a certain amount of confidence to be able to take that trip.
And he fails a little bit, but he figures it out. And the adults in this book aren't great. And sometimes that's true to life, sometimes it's not. Like we said, sometimes you can have a parent that gets it, and sometimes you don't. But in your book, you have a character, Cookie, who I adore. And I want to know, did you have someone did someone inspire that character? Cookie is ancient, and it's very blunt, and it's kind of like what I imagine. Well, my mama's 96. She reminded me of my mama. Just relentlessly blunt, and with it sometimes, not with it other times. But was there someone that inspired Cookie, or did she just come from an amalgamation of other people, or?
Yeah, Cookie's 99 years old, and she is completely out of the game. Don't care anymore. Yeah. And she is Eddie's great aunt. and he is staying with her when he's in New York. She is that old, partly because she was able to witness an entire century of queer life in New York and how it's changed, so she bears witness to that. I based her a lot on my own grandmother, who never lived in New York, so she's got none of that. But Cookie is obsessed with photography and light, and how light can change your perception of what you see. Part of the story, or a lot of the story, has Eddie kind of out in New York City taking photographs to bring back to Cookie, taking Polaroids to bring back to Cookie, because she's stuck in bed. She can't get out of bed anymore. So he's bringing her back scenes from the New York that she loves. I based her a little bit on my own grandmother for that, and also my own grandmother's, she's gone now, but some people here remember her, Graham. She always had a very open idea of what life and people could be. And then partly on a woman called Iris Apfel, who I don't know if anybody here knows, but she was like this amazing, like, kind of fashionista up until her death. I think she was also maybe 99 when she died a couple of years ago, but she was really well known for just completely eccentric, over the top, way too much jewelry, too much makeup, but it all kind of worked. And this is Cookie. Cookie wears sequins to bed. Like, she's not playing around. And as you say, she'll tell you the truth. She'll tell you she loves you, but then she'll tell you you screwed up, and she doesn't have any bones about like doing those things. And I felt like it was, I love the idea of relationships between young people and very, very old people, because as much kind of ink as we spill, or conversation that we spill about generations not understanding each other, I just think that's because they don't listen to each other. Because I think there's so much more in common than there is different from generation to generation. And she's sort of like grossed out by, like, you know, she calls them Googlers. She doesn't know what to call like iPhones, and she's like annoyed that people are always walking around with them. She's like, there's a whole world out here. Why are you looking at that? And you know, that sort of thing. And Eddie has a little bit of agreement with that, but he's also kind of representative of his own generation. And I don't know if this happens to you, but when I write characters, it's like a relationship. And you start to love them, or you get mad at them, or you maybe hate them. And sometimes they do things that you don't really plan, right. Which is one of the weirdest things, when your fingers are moving on a keyboard and you're like, where the hell did that come from? Like, how did she do
What are you doing?
Yeah, and Cookie was one that the hardest words for me to write are always the end. I hate it. And it was really sad for me to say goodbye to Cookie, because, like you, she really meant a lot to me. She's wish fulfillment for me, honestly. Did you have a character like that who you felt like, I want to be that person?
I want to be that person? No. Well, maybe. I really liked, you know, there's a friend group in this, and they call themselves like a Scooby Gang. I mean, they're really like, it's 5 or 6 characters that are in each other's orbit since, you know, the first day of school. And each of them have a different relationship with each other. So there's the main character, and he has relationships with each one, but then each of those characters have a relationship with each other too. And it was really fun to develop all of that. And I think of those characters, my favorite, well, I have 2 favorites. I love this character named Gemma. She's neurodivergent. She's hyper fixated. She loves everything paranormal. And she's younger than everybody else, but ends up being a mentor because she just knows everything. And she was really fun to write. She has no filter. And she blunders a lot. And then I have this other character named Reese, who's a sprite, and the sprites and the werewolves have a beef going on. And he's just there to cause chaos. He's a shit stirrer. So he just shows up and does something and then runs away, and it makes everything chaotic. So
I always envy this shit stirrer.
yeah.
Right? It's just sort of like, it's like a housewives show. It just comes in there and like stir. Do you feel sad when you finish a book? Or
No.
You just do
I was gonna say that. You're like, I'm sad when I write the end. I'm like, thank God the end. It's done. I'm very happy to write the end.
Yeah.
And so are you, when you plot a book, are you a plotter, a pantser, a combination? Like, how do you, because I'm a plotter, so when I get to the end, I'm like, the end. But is that different for you?
No, I'm terrible at plot. I honestly, like, this is the hardest thing for me, is to make a plot that makes sense. And I think that a lot of the writing I have done has been, for me, I have to plot very strictly, because otherwise I would just get lost. It's like being without your map app, honestly. But what I do is I decide where I want to start and I decide where I want to end. And then I kind of plot back towards the middle. Doesn't always fit. It's like making a railroad, right? From this way and this way, and you hope that they connect right in the right place, but they don't always. So, and then some things come up or you think, okay, the character's gonna go left. But then you realize later on, like, well, if they went left, then this would never happen. So they needed to go right. But once you make that change, it just, this sort of like cascade of things sort of start to fall apart. Yeah, exactly. But the plotting part is hard for me, but I do it. I try to be very strict about it, and that's when I get to the part that I much prefer, which is to talk about feelings. I remember, not this book, but my previous book, I told somebody, this book he was talking about a book that he was reading, and he was like, oh, there's just way too many feelings in this book. And I was like, well, you should not buy my book. Because you will not enjoy that. Please buy it, but if you don't read it, I get it.
I love the structure too, because, and I'm sure you had to plan this, maybe you didn't, but, because you have very short chapters, and then you have chapters that are this POV versus a different POV, and then you have chapters that are in the past, and then back to the future, so I'm guessing that that was pretty strictly planned, or
more or less, yeah. I think I probably made some potholes along the way and made some changes, but yeah, more or less. I feel like I'm not a huge consumer of time travel fiction. I have read some and I have enjoyed some, but I never really. I always believe that the ones that have been the most successful when I've read them, or that have felt the most successful to me that I've read, the arc of the story could happen in straight normal time, or it could happen in time travel and whatever. So I'm thinking primarily about my main character's development, and wherever that takes him is where it belongs. I think for me, one thing I tried to do with this book is sort of balance. I wanted enough time in the past, but didn't want too much that it got boring. I wanted enough time in the present to make sure that we all could recognize this kid, but also enough time in the past that we were able to see him be in the past and reveal something about himself that we might not see in a kid who's just walking down the street. So I did not answer your question.
No.
I just started talking. Now I will stop.
Well, so this is your first time travel book. This is my first mystery.
Yeah.
And I had to do a lot of research and a lot of planning on how to write a mystery. And it started at the end, honestly. So I knew how the mystery what the ending was, and I knew the character arc that I wanted my character to go on. And so then I plotted all that out, and then I went backwards and planted all the red herrings. And so then it became very much, okay, this hint has to be dropped here, because if it is dropped here, then this doesn't make sense. And so it was a lot of very meticulous planning.
Do you have like a wall with like Post-its?
Like
and, like,
a wall with like red strings?
Yeah.
No. For this one, I normally use index cards.
Mm,
And I'll write scenes on index cards and then place them along like the plot line.
gotcha.
But for this one, I didn't do that. Amazingly, this one stayed in my head a lot.
Wow.
And you know, was able to be like, oh, I need to drop this here or that hint here and that. And amazingly, this is probably the book that I had the least amount of edits on, because I had to be so intentional. And that the edits that came back were like, can you just add more about the town? Can you add more about like, you know, just the little drops of like fantasy in it? I was like, okay, that's easy.
It's nice when they ask you to add.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, this is actually my longest book too.
Is
It's
it?
like
Yeah.
115,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't read long.
Oh,
It's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Should we go to questions?
Sure.
I don't know. Does anybody have any questions that they can ask?
So you have your characters going into the past, and you have your characters seeing the future. How do you both keep the different timelines and what might happen and what has happened, you know, in mind as you develop the present narrative?
What's your secret?
Well, so the character, Cam, the main character that's seeing, that's clairvoyant and seeing glimpses of the future, I knew what the first glimpse was going to be because that drives the rest of the plot. And then from there, I was like, well, it would be fun if he saw this. Or it would be fun if this happened. Or there is a character that sees ghosts. What if he had a vision of that character seeing a ghost? What would that look like to him? And so it was really just me playing around.
Yeah, kind of the same. And that what if question is really interesting to me because that's a way to kind of like challenge yourself, right? That's what I feel. Going back into the past, I wanted to make sure that he was seeing and experiencing something that would be relevant to him now. And also, one thing I didn't do, which a lot of time travel books do, is like, you go into the past and then you, I don't know, shoot Hitler, and then like the history changes, right? I didn't do any of that, so, because that would be way too confusing for me. But I wanted him to go back and learn some of the names that he didn't know, Mae West, and Dorothy Parker, and Jean Mallon, and Gladys Bentley, and some of these really important people in queer history. And not necessarily interact with them, but at least kind of cross paths and sort of see the impact of that. You know, I think about Mae West, as I mentioned earlier, she was like, I don't know, like Madonna, you know what I mean? Like she was sort of iconic to, and celebrated in the same way that gay people, especially gay men, sort of celebrate these iconic pop stars or whatever, or movie stars. And so that kind of ideal hasn't changed. The characters have changed. But I wanted him to see a through line from what people experienced in the past to what they experienced, what he's experiencing now, and to recognize that, yeah, things are different, but they're also not that different. And to be able to find some sort of zone within that for himself to feel like he's growing up and coming into himself. So again, I didn't answer your question. Sorry.
I did like the moments when one of like Cookie or Albert or one of the other characters mentioned something and he was like, what? What is that? And it like hurt me a little bit when I was like, you don't know what Psycho is? Or those kind of, but then it kind of grounded me because I was like, well, yeah, this, you might not know what that is.
Yeah.
And the folks that our books are geared toward wouldn't know, maybe.
For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was it was funny, but it also kind of just reminded me, and really grounded the time travel that you have in there.
Yeah, and I'm not always so sure that it is the exact person that's the important thing, but the idea that there's a cipher or an icon, and using that person to reflect ideas back to yourself and kind of come to an understanding about yourself. But yeah, it breaks my heart. I was telling FT a few minutes ago about a friend of mine who's probably 25, 30 years younger than I am, and I mentioned Betty Davis, and he was like, I think I know what that is. I'm not sure. And I was just like, oh my God, we need to run some movies.
And my corresponding story to that was that I was talking to some other authors, and we were talking just about things that you watched or read when you were younger, and then like show them to your nieces and nephews or your kids or something like that, and then realize like how awful they are. And I was talking about Gremlins, and how if you watch Gremlins now, I mean like they put one in a blender, and that's like I watched that when I was 6 years old, and then I would mention that, and they were like, "What's Gremlins?" I was like, "Oh no."
Ça change. Does anybody else have any questions? You.
Hi. So one of my favorite parts about sort of watching the behind the scenes of when you first worked together, your first novel, was sort of magpieing together different touch points of inspiration, whether it's a song or a particular photograph or a particular magazine cover or something like that to kind of like piece together what the setting was about for Living on My Name. And you mentioned, Weimar Germany and 1930s New York and Midwest. But I was curious if there was anything in particular during your research for this particular project that like stuck out to you as like, this is the image, this is the song, this is something that you kept coming back to as like a grounding touch point for that gathering process.
Maybe Cole Porter, because really interesting character. He's not a big character in the story, but the music kind of weaves throughout the story. And Cole Porter's music, you hear it all the time, and sometimes you don't know it's Cole Porter, but it's just saturated culture. And this is true of queer people throughout history. In terms of cultural touchstones, we have made an outsized contribution to that in ways that people don't always realize. And there are lots of people walking around in the world today who, if you said to them Cole Porter was gay, they would be mad at you. Should be. But as somebody, and then there's other ones too, and they play smaller roles in the book, and we wouldn't necessarily know who they are today. But Jean Mallon was an extremely famous drag queen in the teens and 20s. Bert Savoy was also an extremely famous drag queen. They would pull thousands of people to shows, thousands, and doing impersonations of Mae West or other people, Libby Holman or other people from that era. So in those cases, it's more just the concept of playing with gender for entertainment, but also as a means of individual expression and also as a means of projecting an identity. But I think Cole Porter, as an undercurrent, there's very little music, I feel like, even now that's being made that doesn't have influences from him and his cohorts. I don't know if that's really true, but that's how I think about it.
I have a question for both of you. Is it an intentional decision to write YA like for teenagers, or is it kind of something that just happened for you?
It was intentional for me. I wanted to write for an audience that I wanted to write the sci-fi and fantasy books that I wanted as a kid. And growing up in the 80s and 90s and reading the sci-fi and the fantasy that was coming out at that time, I mean, there were great authors, Mercedes Lackey and I read a lot of Robert Jordan, and there was great books, but it was always a struggle to find myself, or to find myself represented in those. And if I found someone, it was the alien or the android, like Data from Star Trek Next Generation. So it didn't feel great to know that that the characters that felt most like me weren't the characters that were the main character in the story. They were always a side character, or they were there to die, or something to that effect. So yeah, I made a conscious decision that I'm going to write sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm going to write it for teen FT who did not have that.
I thought about it a lot too. To be honest with you, I often struggle, what even is YA? Like, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that you have a young protagonist? Kind of, but there are lots of books in the world. You could look at Jane Austen and be like, a lot of this is kind of YA. Some of these girls are 16, right? Like, and they're getting married, which is weird, but like, anyway. But I think there's something about that time of life when you are defining yourself not against your family, but as distinct to your family, and creating a person, sort of an identity, or not creating, but realizing an identity that, and understanding where it fits in the world or doesn't fit, and how you have to manage that. I think, and understanding the world isn't always going to bend to you. Like, what you have to do is figure out how to rope it up the world every now and then, and like figure out how to take what you've got, to fill in for what you haven't got, and find your way forward. And I think that that's sort of a universal story. I feel like it's been around since the Greeks, probably before that. And so for me, yeah, same to you. I mean, there was very little, like when I was growing up, there was like kind of nothing, in which there were gay characters who had any complexity at all. Happy endings, sad endings, I'm not so worried about that, but like I want to show complexity, and I want to show it's not just a gay person or a queer person, but here is a person in all the complexity. Part of that includes gayness and queerness, and I feel like that would have made a big difference to me when I was a kid. And I wonder, I also feel like a lot of why read by people who are much older than the quote-unquote intended audience is, but I think that that's actually kind of exciting too, because I read it all the time because I'm looking, I love The Hunger Games, for example, because I love this idea of this hero and what she is sort of accomplishing, but she's complicated and I don't like her on every page, but like that kind of story excites me. And so yeah, also I love the audience for YA, for sure. YA readers are way cooler than adult readers, in my opinion. Anybody else?
My question is, what are both of your feelings about writing as rebellion, especially given current events?
I have been thinking a lot about this question recently. A friend of mine, maybe 4 weeks ago, asked me, do you think writing fiction is activism? And I have been chewing on that question for a month because I think it's really important to write these kinds of stories. I think our books are probably going to suffer in the short term, especially from libraries who just don't want to be bothered. They may agree or disagree with what's in the book, almost doesn't matter. They just don't want to hear from Karen up the road.
Yeah.
So I feel, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think as part of the suite of activities, as activism, it doesn't have to hurt to write stories. Is it the same as really, I don't know if it's, I don't know, but I think it's important. And I also think that like the more the better, because I think there are a lot of books, there will be people who read my books and think, I don't identify with that, I don't get it, whatever. Great, I'm glad you opened it, right? But there's another book for you. My grandmother, the ancient one, who I mentioned earlier, she was a librarian her whole life. And she told me a story right before she died about the 1960s, and they were banning Philip Roth or something like that from her library. And she used to take the point of view that, like, you know, this man would come in and be like, I can't believe you have this on the shelf, this is ridiculous. And she would just very sort of sweetly and politely take the book from him and say, then it's not for you. This book is for somebody else. Have a nice day. I don't know. But that again, those kinds of things are cyclical. They keep coming back and they keep expressing themselves in different ways. So if nothing else, it's good to flood the zone with more content in a way, I think. That's a really interesting question, though, and a really tough one for me to answer.
To one of your points, I think that there's room on the library shelves for every kind of story. And especially every kind of queer story, or every kind of story that has BIPOC leads, or, you know, that is diverse in some way. And it doesn't always have to be a coming out story. It could be just a story about psychics and werewolves. It could be a story about time travel. But those experiences, each book's gonna have a different experience. Each book's gonna, you know, resonate with a different reader. And I mean, I think it's disingenuous to say that I don't think about book bans when I'm writing books, because, I mean, this is my job. But it's not going to change the stories that I want to write, and it's not going to change what I want to do and what I've set out to do. It really is going to, we're going to have to see what publishing does, to see if they're still going to buy books like ours. And I think for right now they will, because there's a market, but you know, it's for the future, I think.
I mean, the good news is, like, people keep saying books are dying, books are better than ever. They are healthier than ever. The business is booming in so many ways. It's more challenging, but it's still happening, and they're always going to be there. And so I feel a lot of comfort in that, in whatever form they take. I love audiobooks, by the way.
Audiobooks are great.
The best. Love them. Hi.
You talked about yourself as a young person and your feelings. Are young people being mentored to write their stories? Very young people, and they can help to also write their own stories. Are you interested in that? Do you think it's possible?
I think more and more there are opportunities from that. I think everybody learns in different ways and finds inspiration in different places. I think the internet has been really great for this kind of thing, for young people to find places where they can share ideas, share stories, experiment, screw up, have victories. So yes, I think more and more and more, and I think that, I mean, honestly, as weird as social media can be sometimes, as a place to express yourself, I feel like that's a place where a lot of young people kind of get their feet wet to understand that, like, if I open myself up, if I show my heart, and not everybody laughs at me, then maybe there's a place for my heart to go. And I do think I think that exists, and I think it's growing.
And I think right now there's a crop of writers that are focused on mentoring the folks coming up behind us and not pulling up the ladder behind us, and making sure that when I have, you know, folks that are debuting or folks that have ideas and you know, they want me to blurb a book, or they want me to help them with the query letter or things like that, I try to make myself as available as possible to help the folks that are writing their stories and want to get them out there, to help them get to that point.
Anybody else? Thank you for coming. Can I take your picture before we go out?